On a cold autumn night, deep in the heart of the forest, a tiny bear cub lay trembling near a fallen tree. His mother had disappeared, and he was too young to survive on his own. The wind howled through the trees, rustling the brittle leaves and sending a chill through the air. The cub whimpered, curling into a ball, his small body shaking with fear and cold. His fur, still soft and fluffy, did little to protect him from the biting wind. His stomach rumbled with hunger, and his tiny claws dug into the damp earth as he let out a pitiful cry. But the forest remained indifferent to his suffering. Just then, soft footsteps approached, barely audible over the whispering wind. A golden-furred dog emerged from the shadows, her keen eyes scanning the area with caution. Her name was Luna, a stray who had made the forest her home. She had just given birth to a litter of puppies in a hollowed-out log nearby. And though her own body was weary, her maternal instincts remained strong. She had lost one of her pups the night before, a loss that still weighed heavily on her heart. The ache of her missing pup made her pause as she noticed the helpless cub shivering in the dim moonlight. Luna sniffed the air, her sensitive nose detecting the cub's fear, hunger, and loneliness. She stepped closer, her ears pricked forward, and gently nudged the little bear with her damp nose. The cub lifted his head, his tiny black eyes full of fear and uncertainty. His trembling intensified as he took in the strange yet warm creature before him. He had never seen a dog before, yet there was something in Luna's gaze, something soft and reassuring, that made him hesitate instead of retreat. Luna, sensing his distress, lowered her head and licked his face gently. Her tongue was warm and rough, but it carried a comfort the cub had longed for since his mother had vanished. The warmth spread through him like a small flame, flickering to life. His whimpers quieted, his fear dulled, and instinctively he nuzzled closer to her fur. She smelled safe, like warmth and life, and his tiny paws clutched at her, as if afraid she might disappear too. Luna let out a soft whine, a mother's sound, and wagged her tail slightly, reassuring the cub that he was not alone. With a final nudge, she turned and began walking toward her den, glancing back to see if he would follow. The cub hesitated, his body weak and exhausted, but something deep within him urged him forward. He stumbled on unsteady legs, following the golden dog as she guided him through the underbrush. The journey was slow. His small limbs struggled to keep up, but Luna was patient, stopping every few steps to make sure he did not fall behind. As they reached the den, the soft squeaks of newborn puppies filled the air. The hollowed-out log, nestled between the roots of an ancient tree, was warm and sheltered from the wind. Luna stepped inside first, her golden fur blending with the darkness of her home. The cub lingered at the entrance, his tiny heart pounding. He could smell the milk, feel the warmth, but he was unsure. He was not one of them. Luna turned and gently nudged him again, her eyes full of understanding. She curled around her litter, her body a protective barrier against the night. Her puppies wriggled and whimpered, pressing close to her belly, their tiny bodies seeking warmth and nourishment. The cub hesitated only a moment longer before his hunger won over his fear. With tentative steps, he crawled forward, pressing himself into the warmth of Luna's fur. The puppies squirmed around him, their soft bodies brushing against his, but none of them protested his presence. Without hesitation, Luna shifted slightly, allowing the cub to nurse alongside her own. He latched on clumsily, his tiny paws pressing against her as he drank greedily. The warm milk filled his empty belly, easing the ache that had gnawed at him for hours. His tense body relaxed for the first time that night. He was not alone anymore. As the night deepened, the wind continued to howl outside. But inside the den, there was only warmth, only the sound of soft breathing and tiny heartbeats. The cub, now full and safe, nestled deeper into Luna's fur, his tiny body rising and falling with the rhythm of her breath. He wasn't like the puppies, but Luna didn't care. He was just another baby that needed her love, and love was something she had plenty to give. Luna sighed softly, resting her head on her paws as her eyes grew heavy with sleep. She had lost a pup, but perhaps fate had brought her another to care for. The cub, sensing her warmth, let out a small sigh of contentment, his tiny paws twitching as sleep took him. The puppies too dozed off, their small bodies pressed together in a tangle of fur and trust. The forest outside remained dark and cold, but inside the den there was light, not from fire, but from the quiet bond forming between a mother and a lost soul who had found his way home. As the weeks passed, the cub, whom Luna's owner named Bruno, grew much faster than his puppy siblings. He tried to bark but only managed deep grunts. He chased his tail clumsily and played tug-of-war, often winning too easily. But to Luna, he was just another one of her babies. Bruno adored his mother. He followed her everywhere, his big paws making the ground shake, while his smaller siblings yipped and ran around him. The villagers watched in amazement as a bear, raised by a dog, learned to act like one. He imitated Luna in every way possible. When she scratched behind her ear with a hind leg, Bruno awkwardly tried to do the same, only to topple over onto his side with a confused huff. When Luna wagged her tail in excitement, Bruno swayed his stubby, furry backside, much to the delight of the villagers who often gathered to watch him. But the most amusing of all was his attempt to howl at the moon. The puppies, under Luna's encouragement, would raise their snouts and let out a chorus of small, high-pitched howls. Bruno, not wanting to be left out, lifted his head and let out what he thought was a howl, but it came out as a deep, guttural groan that rumbled through the village like distant thunder. Chickens flapped in alarm, and an old woman nearly dropped her basket of apples. Yet Luna simply nuzzled him, as if to say, "Good try, my little one." As time passed, Bruno's differences became more pronounced. His body was no longer soft and pudgy like the puppies. Instead, he grew thick, muscular limbs, and his coat darkened into a sleek, glossy black. He towered over his siblings, his broad paws capable of swatting them aside during play, though he always held back, careful not to hurt them. Despite his size, Bruno was gentle. He let the puppies climb onto his back, tumbling down in fits of laughter. When they played chase, he lumbered after them with surprising grace, letting them nip at his legs without ever retaliating. The villagers marveled at the strange sight, a bear, behaving just like a dog, rolling in the dirt, gnawing on bones, and curling up beside Luna for warmth. One chilly evening, the village children decided to include Bruno in their games. They tied a rope to a thick branch and swung from it, their laughter echoing through the trees. Seeing the fun, Bruno clambered up, grabbing the rope with his massive claws. The branch groaned under his weight before snapping clean off, sending him tumbling into the dust with a bewildered expression. The children erupted into laughter, rushing to his side to ruffle his fur and reassure him. As much as the villagers adored him, some elders began to voice concerns. "He is growing too fast," they murmured. "One day his instincts will take over. He is a bear, not a dog." Luna's owner, a kind-hearted man named Elias, dismissed their fears. "Bruno is family. He is no more dangerous than Luna herself." But doubt lingered in the villagers' eyes. They watched cautiously as Bruno continued to grow, his once playful grunts deepening into low rumbles that made the very air vibrate. One evening, a hunter passed through the village, pausing at the sight of Bruno sitting contentedly beside Luna. "That bear won't stay tame forever," he warned. "It would be wise to send him back to the wild before he remembers what he truly is." Elias stroked his beard thoughtfully but said nothing. He could not imagine tearing Bruno away from the only family he had ever known. Yet deep inside, he worried. Winter arrived, dusting the village with a thick layer of snow. Bruno experienced his first snowfall with the wonder of a child. He bounded through the drifts, sending plumes of white powder into the air. The puppies barked excitedly as he rolled onto his back, flailing his limbs and leaving an enormous imprint in the snow. But as the nights grew colder, Luna noticed a change in him. He became restless, pacing outside the house, lifting his snout to sniff the crisp air. Something ancient stirred within him. One night, as the village slept, Bruno wandered toward the forest, drawn by a distant scent, a whisper of something familiar yet unknown. He hesitated at the tree line, glancing back at the small home where Luna and his siblings lay curled up in warmth. His heart ached with confusion. The next morning, Elias found him outside, his fur dusted with snow, his eyes filled with a quiet longing. Elias knelt beside him, running a hand through his thick coat. "You feel it, don't you, boy?" he murmured. "The call of the wild." Bruno pressed his head against Elias' chest, as if seeking comfort. But the call remained, a persistent whisper in the back of his mind. Days passed and Luna, sensing something was changing, became more protective. She nudged Bruno back whenever he wandered too close to the woods. She licked his face, nuzzled him as she had when he was a tiny cub. But she could not stop what was coming. The villagers watched, their whispers growing louder. "It's time," they said. "He must leave before he forgets he is a bear." Ilias wrestled with the decision. How could he send away the creature who had become a son to Luna, a brother to the pups, a beloved presence in the village? But he knew nature could not be ignored. The morning Bruno left, the village was silent. The puppies whimpered, circling him as if trying to understand. Luna nudged him one last time, her eyes filled with something deeper than instinct, a mother's sorrow. Ilias walked him to the edge of the forest, his heart heavy. Bruno turned back one last time, his deep brown eyes locking with Ilias. Then with a slow, deliberate step, he disappeared into the trees. For days, Luna waited by the forest's edge, ears pricked for any sign of her son. The village felt emptier without him, the children quieter, the nights missing the deep rumble of his playful growls. Then one evening, a distant sound echoed through the village, a deep, thunderous howl, unlike anything they had ever heard. Luna lifted her head, her tail wagging ever so slightly. Bruno had not forgotten them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills, casting the village in hues of amber and violet, a hunter entered the quiet settlement. His boots crunched against the gravel path, the weight of his rifle slung over his shoulder, a silent promise of danger. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, landed on Bruno, the enormous, shaggy bear resting near the village square. The hunter's lips curled into a smirk, and he leaned toward a man beside him, whispering, "That bear doesn't belong here. He'll be dangerous one day." Bruno, oblivious to the conversation, lay on his side, his thick fur rippling as he breathed. He had spent the day playing with the children by the river, splashing water with his massive paws, his deep rumbling chuckles blending with their laughter. To the villagers, he was not a beast but a guardian, a gentle giant who had lived among them since he was a cub. The hunter, however, was unmoved by sentiment. He adjusted his grip on his rifle and took a step forward, his intentions clear. Before he could move any closer, a streak of silver fur darted in front of him. Luna, the wiry yet strong wolf who had raised Bruno as her own, stood between the hunter and her son. Her fur bristled like a field of thorns, her amber eyes burning with an untamed fire. A low, guttural growl rumbled from deep within her chest, primal and protective. She was smaller than Bruno, dwarfed by his sheer size, but her love made her fearless. The hunter hesitated. Wolves were cunning, and Luna, though aging, carried the wisdom of the wild in her stance. She lowered her head, ears pinned back, her fangs glinting in the dimming light. Her warning was clear. No harm would come to Bruno while she still drew breath. A murmur rippled through the gathered villagers. They had grown fond of the peculiar family, an orphaned bear, nurtured by a lone wolf, embraced by the people as one of their own. A young girl, no older than 10, clutched the hem of her mother's dress and stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "You can't take Bruno. He's part of our home." An elderly woman, her face lined with years of kindness, nodded in agreement. "That's not just a bear," she said, her voice steady. "That's Luna's son." The words carried weight, settling over the crowd like a protective spell. More villagers stepped forward, their eyes hard with determination. Some held farming tools, not as weapons but as symbols of their stand. A blacksmith crossed his arms, his apron stained with the day's work, while a fisherman, still smelling of the sea, clenched his jaw. A shepherd boy, barely a man, gripped his staff, his knuckles white. They had no love for violence, but neither would they allow harm to come to one of their own. The hunter scoffed. "A bear is a bear," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "One day he'll turn on you. It's his nature." Luna's growl deepened, her claws digging into the earth. Bruno, sensing the tension, slowly rose to his feet. His immense form cast a long shadow over the hunter. Though he had never been one for conflict, something in his mother's posture made him stand tall. He let out a soft, questioning chuff, glancing between Luna and the hunter. The hunter stiffened, gripping his rifle tighter. But before he could make another move, the village elder, a man whose wisdom had guided the people for decades, stepped forward. His voice, though gentle, held a quiet authority. "We've watched this bear grow from a helpless cub into a creature of kindness and loyalty. He has harmed no one. We do not judge by nature alone, but by the life one chooses to live." The hunter's gaze darted from face to face, seeing no fear, only unwavering resolve. He was outnumbered, outmatched not by weapons, but by unity. With a frustrated grunt, he let his rifle slip back onto his shoulder. "You're making a mistake," he muttered before turning on his heel, disappearing into the twilight. A collective sigh of relief spread through the villagers. The children rushed to Bruno's side, their tiny hands patting his thick fur. Luna, still tense, watched the hunters retreat until he was nothing more than a shadow beyond the hills. Only then did she turn to her son, nuzzling him reassuringly. Bruno rumbled a soft, contented grunt, pressing his massive forehead against her own. The village elder smiled. "Come," he said, his voice warm. "Let's celebrate the family we choose, not the one we are born into." That night, under a sky strewn with stars, the village gathered around a great bonfire. Music filled the air, laughter ringing through the trees. Bruno lay beside Luna, his great paws tucked under his chin, his heart at peace. He was not just a bear, he was home. As Bruno grew into a massive, strong bear, he never forgot who had loved him first. Though he towered over Luna now, his once small frame replaced by rippling muscle and thick, shaggy fur, he remained the same gentle creature at heart. His dark eyes still held the warmth of the tiny cub who had once fit in Luna's arms, and his devotion to her never wavered. He still wagged his stubby tail like a dog whenever he saw her, an amusing sight for such a powerful beast, and at night he curled up beside her, his immense body radiating warmth, a living fortress of fur and love. Luna had raised Bruno from the time he had been no larger than a loaf of bread, his fur a soft fuzz that barely kept him warm. She had fed him with careful hands, wiped the milk from his tiny snout, and whispered lullabies as he dozed against her chest. She had been his world before he had even known what the world truly was. And now, though the world had changed for them both, that love remained steadfast. As the seasons turned, the village on the outskirts of the forest marveled at their bond. Some feared Bruno at first, his sheer size and undeniable force of nature. He was a bear, after all, with claws the size of a man's hand and the strength to topple trees. But he never harmed a soul, never growled in anger, never bared his teeth except in playful grins. The village children, once wary, grew bold enough to reach out and stroke his thick fur. He let them climb onto his back, their delighted laughter filling the air as Luna guided him carefully through the winding paths of their home. But not everyone understood. "He's still a wild animal," the elders would warn Luna, shaking their heads as they watched Bruno follow her through the fields like a lovesick pup. "One day, instinct will take over. One day he will remember what he is." Luna would only smile, her fingers threading through the fur behind Bruno's ears. "He remembers who he is," she would reply, "and he remembers who I am." And Bruno did. He remembered the cold nights when she had wrapped him in blankets, pressing his tiny body close to hers so he wouldn't shiver. He remembered the days when his legs had been too weak to carry him far, and she had lifted him onto her back without hesitation. He remembered how she had never turned away from him, even as he grew, even as he became something different, something others feared. He remembered love. One autumn evening, as the leaves painted the world in hues of gold and crimson, Luna and Bruno walked along the river's edge. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant fires from the village. Bruno ambled beside her, his massive paws leaving imprints in the soft soil. He had grown so large that his head reached past her shoulders now, but still he walked as he always had, with his heart tethered to hers. She ran her fingers along his thick fur as she spoke to him, her voice a melody of comfort and familiarity. "Do you remember when you first saw snow?" she asked with a laugh. "You thought it was something alive, and you tried to catch it with your little paws." Bruno gave a deep, rumbling sound, something between a growl and a chuckle. He did remember. He remembered the way Luna had laughed, the way she had twirled in the falling flakes, showing him there was nothing to fear. As the sky darkened, Luna sat on a fallen log near the river, and Bruno settled beside her, resting his heavy head on her lap. The stars blinked to life above them, mirrored in the dark water at their feet. The world was quiet except for the rustling of the trees and the distant calls of owls. And then, a noise, a rustling too deliberate to be the wind. Bruno lifted his head, ears twitching. Luna felt the shift in his muscles, the way he became still, alert. A pair of yellow eyes gleamed from the underbrush. Then another. Then more. Wolves. Luna's breath caught in her throat. She had seen wolves before. Beautiful, graceful, but dangerous when hungry. She knew they traveled in packs, knew that their glowing eyes meant they were watching, assessing. Bruno rose slowly to his feet. He did not growl, did not bare his teeth, but his stance shifted, becoming something ancient, something powerful. The wolves hesitated, their eyes flickering between Luna and the bear beside her. They had the numbers, but they were not foolish. Bruno did not move. He stood like a guardian carved from stone, his presence a silent warning. For several long heartbeats, the forest held its breath. Then one by one, the eyes vanished. The wolves melted back into the night, their hunger seeking easier prey. Luna exhaled, her fingers trembling as she reached for Bruno's fur. "You saved me," she whispered. Bruno made a soft sound and nudged her hand with his snout. He had always been her protector, just as she had once been his. That night when they returned home, Luna curled up in her bed, and Bruno, though far too large now, nestled beside her as he always had. His warmth pressed against her back, his breath slow and steady, a rhythm she had known since he was small. Because sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about love. It's about the bonds we choose, the hearts that beat for one another, no matter how different they may be. And in that small home at the edge of the woods, under the watchful gaze of the stars, a girl and her bear slept side by side, knowing that no force in the world could break what they had built together.